Your dog is watching your face right now, not the way you watch a stranger on the street. Casually, half present. It's watching the way a doctor watches a patient, comparing signals, looking for something that doesn't line up. You say, "It's fine," and your voice goes slightly flat and your shoulders stay tight. You don't notice any of this. Your dog does. The common assumption is that animals live in a simpler world than we do, one of instincts and smells and not much nuance. We assume deception is a human invention, something that requires language, social complexity, a theory of mind sophisticated enough to hold two versions of reality at once: what's true and what you want someone else to believe. Most people believe their pet knows roughly what they are: a food source, a warm presence, a reliable shape in the room. But a series of studies published between 2013 and 2024, using controlled laboratory conditions and double-blind designs, found something that complicates this picture. Animals that live closely with humans don't just react to your actions. They monitor the relationship between your signals. And when those signals diverge, when what you show doesn't match what you seem to feel, something in their behavior changes. The question isn't whether animals understand lying the way a detective understands it. The question is whether they can detect the thing that always travels with a lie. And what the research found wasn't a vague sensitivity to mood. It was a specific, measurable behavioral response to the exact moment your signals stop agreeing with each other. Something that was recorded in a laboratory in Vienna with 260 dogs under conditions precise enough that the result is hard to explain away. That gap between your signals is exactly what Lucrezia Leonardo and her team set out to measure. In 2021, they published a study in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, using 260 dogs, one of the largest samples ever used in canine cognition research. The setup was specific and careful. A dog watched food being hidden in one of two locations. Then a human informant told the dog where the food was. In some trials, that informant had been present when the food was hidden. They had true knowledge of its location. In other trials, the informant had been absent. They had a false belief about where the food actually was. The question was whether the dog would treat those two informants differently. It did. Dogs followed misleading suggestions significantly more often when the informant genuinely didn't know the truth than when the informant should have known it. Think about what that means. The dog wasn't just tracking where the human pointed. It was tracking something about the human's relationship to the information, whether the signal fit what this person should actually know. Leonardo and her colleagues were careful about their interpretation. They did not claim dogs have a complete human-like theory of mind, but the data showed that dogs distinguish between a person who is wrong because they were misled and a person who is wrong despite knowing better. In the same year, Britta Schoenemann and colleagues published a separate study in Scientific Reports using what's called the unwilling versus unable paradigm. They placed dogs in situations where a human either intentionally withheld food from them, accidentally dropped it, or was physically prevented from giving it. Dogs behaved differently in the intentional condition. When a human chose not to give them something, the dog's behavior shifted in a way it didn't when the human simply couldn't. Dogs were distinguishing, at some level, between "you failed" and "you decided not to." That difference is the ground floor of understanding deception. A real lie isn't an accident. It's a choice. And dogs, according to this data, can sometimes detect the signature of a choice, but cognition is only part of the answer. The deeper layer isn't about what dogs think. It's about what they smell. Part of the answer lives in comparative cognition, the scientific study of how non-human animals perceive and process information about the world and about other minds. But another part of the answer is older and stranger than any cognitive framework. It lives in chemistry. In 2022, Clara Wilson and colleagues at Queen's University Belfast published a study in PLOS One that gave dogs something specific to work with: human breath and sweat. They collected samples from people at baseline, relaxed, unstressed, and then again after a mentally demanding task designed to provoke psychological stress. The samples were presented to dogs in a controlled, double-blind, forced-choice procedure. Dogs could reliably distinguish the baseline sample from the stress sample. Your body, under stress, produces a chemically different signal than your body at rest. A dog can smell that. In 2024, Zoe Park-Cortez and colleagues published findings in scientific reports showing that human stress odor doesn't just register with dogs, it changes their decisions. Dogs exposed to stress odor from an unfamiliar person showed more cautious, more pessimistic responses in ambiguous situations. The odor shifted their cognitive state, which means that if you are anxious while saying something calm, your dog isn't just smelling a mismatch. That mismatch is physically altering how your dog approaches what comes next. But that's not the strangest part. The strangest part is what dogs do with your face. In 2016, Natalia Albuquerque and colleagues published research in Biology Letters showing that dogs can integrate emotional information across senses. They can combine what they see on your face with what they hear in your voice and arrive at a read of your emotional state. 2 years later, a study by Corson Mueller and colleagues in Scientific Reports went further. Researchers tested whether dogs looked longer at a face when its emotional content matched the voice they were hearing. They did. Dogs were cross-referencing, running a continuous comparison between auditory signal and visual signal and noticing when those channels carried different emotional content. Now hold that against the structure of a lie. When a person lies, certain things happen in parallel. The words are controlled, but the voice carries small tension. The face is arranged for calm, but the body holds a different posture. The sentence is smooth, but something below the sentence isn't. You know this feeling when someone lies to you. You feel the mismatch before you can name it. Your dog is doing something structurally similar, except it has been doing it longer than you have. It has had 10,000 years of practice reading humans, built into its biology, running below conscious thought. Here is the single fact in all of this research that is hardest to metabolize. A dog doesn't need to understand your sentence. It only needs to notice that your face and your voice aren't saying the same thing. And according to the 2018 data, it does. Cats get underestimated here, and they shouldn't. In 2013, Atsuko Saito and Kazutaka Shinozuka published research in Animal Cognition showing that cats recognize their owner's voice when the owner is out of sight. In 2015, Isabella Merola and colleagues showed in Animal Cognition that cats use their owner's emotional reactions as information when deciding whether an unfamiliar object is safe. The cat looks at you first. It checks your face. Then it decides. And in 2020, Anna Quaranta and colleagues published findings in the journal Animals confirming that cats integrate visual and auditory signals to recognize emotional states in both humans and other cats. They modulate their behavior based on emotional valence, which means that if you tell a cat something is fine while your body communicates the opposite, the cat is gathering data on both channels simultaneously. It's not the lie it catches, it's the gap. And that gap, you felt it close around you, in your own home, without knowing what it was. That gap is what you were living inside the last time you came home from a difficult day and told everyone you were fine. You meant it to be true. You walked through the door and said the right things and watched your dog follow you from room to room anyway, pressing close, settling at your feet with unusual urgency. You assumed it was coincidence or affection or some behavioral quirk. It wasn't. Your dog was responding to a signal, the chemistry of your stress in your breath and sweat, the slightly altered tension in the way you moved, the vocal pattern that said one thing while your body said another. You walked in carrying a mismatch, and your dog detected it before you'd sat down. Think about the last time you were nervous around an animal, the way it looked at you, whether it came closer or moved away. You were broadcasting something your words couldn't carry, and it was reading you in real time, across multiple channels at once. You were never a simple input to the creature you live with. You were a continuous transmission, face, voice, chemistry, movement, and all of it was being monitored, compared, and noted. Not because your dog was suspicious of you, because this is what 10,000 years of living alongside humans has built into its biology. You are the most important thing in your dog's perceptual world. And it has developed over those 10,000 years an extraordinary sensitivity to the moments when the signals you broadcast don't agree. You don't have to be lying for this to trigger. You just have to be carrying something you haven't said yet. What the data cannot reach is the interior of this experience for the animal. The studies tell us what dogs and cats do. They do not tell us what it is like to be the dog doing it. When a dog follows the misleading suggestion of an informant who should have known better and treats that informant with something like wariness, is there a version of, "I don't trust you" forming somewhere in that dog's mind? Or is it a behavioral output with no accompanying experience, no inner weather at all? The honest answer is that science cannot currently answer this question. We can measure behavioral responses. We can observe that stress odor changes a dog's decisions. We can document that a dog looks longer at a matched face-voice pair than a mismatched one. But what is happening in the animal's subjective world during these moments? Whether it registers something we would recognize as suspicion, or quiet unease, or simply a shift in the texture of the room, is beyond what any current methodology can access. The question that stays with you after reading this research is a simple one. If your dog has been monitoring the gap between what you show and what you feel for your entire life together, and you have never known it was doing this, what else has it been noticing? You said, "It's fine." Your shoulders were tight. Your voice went flat. And somewhere in the room, a continuous biological process that has been running for 10,000 years picked up the mismatch between your face and your voice, the altered chemistry in your breath, the behavioral signature of a choice rather than an accident, and noted it without judgment, without language, without any of the drama you'd attach to the moment if you knew what was happening. You were not opaque. You were never opaque. You were always the most readable thing in the room.